Hades stood on the edge of the underworld's deepest chasm, gazing into the abyss that stretched endlessly below him. The realm he ruled had always been a place of inevitability, a land where souls drifted, where death was not feared but accepted. It was his kingdom, and he had long embraced its cold, solitary truth. But none of that could ease the turmoil that had gripped him ever since Persephone had crossed the boundary between the living and the dead. He had never intended for it to go this far. He had not meant to love her. She was never meant to be his. When Persephone had first appeared in his domain, she had been a force of nature, pure and untamed, a goddess of spring whose laughter filled the air like music, whose very presence turned barren earth into a blooming garden. She had been a radiant thing, untouched by the shadows of his realm, a reminder of everything he could never have: light, growth, and warmth. She had represented all that he had lost, the joys of the world above that had never truly been his. And yet, when he saw her, when he felt the tremor of her being as she danced on the earth, free and unburdened, something in him had shifted. It had been sudden, unexpected, like a crack opening in a wall that had stood for eternity. Hades had never been the type to crave the light. He had always accepted his role, embracing the quiet certainty of death. But with Persephone it was different. Her presence disturbed something deep within him, something that he had buried for eons. He had tried to ignore it at first. She was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, the very embodiment of life and nature. She could never belong to him. But each time he watched her from the shadows, he felt a pull, a magnetic force he could not explain, an aching desire to possess something so vibrant, so alive. It was not just her beauty or her grace, though both were undeniable. It was the purity of her existence, her innocence, her connection to the earth itself. He had begun to wonder what would happen if she were his. So, Hades made his decision, though it had not come easily. He was the god of the underworld, ruler of death, keeper of souls. And yet, in that moment, he felt like a mere mortal, moved by emotions that did not belong in his cold, eternal domain. He had wanted her, needed her, perhaps. But it wasn't just possession he sought. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. For all his power, for all his sovereignty over the dead, there was an emptiness inside him that Persephone seemed to fill. When he looked at her, he saw something more than the goddess of spring. He saw a possibility, a chance for something he had long abandoned: connection. When he had pulled her into the underworld, the act had been violent, sudden, an earthquake of emotions that neither of them could have anticipated. His heart had beat faster than he could understand. As he watched her disappear into the darkness below, he had known what it would mean for her. The moment she entered the underworld, the laws of life and death would shift, and she would not leave the same. He had done it all for her, for the possibility of them. But that didn't mean it had been easy. Hades had not been a god who had ever asked for anything. He had ruled his realm with indifference, never desiring more than what he had. He had accepted his solitude, his role, and the endless stream of souls who passed through his gates. The thought of his own desires had always seemed unimportant compared to his responsibilities. Yet, with Persephone, that had changed. She had been the first to challenge his indifference. Her presence had sparked a revolution in him, a battle between his duty to the dead and his own longing for her. As he watched her struggle, fight against the shadows, he had wanted to protect her from the harshness of his realm, to shield her from the loneliness that had surrounded him for so long. He saw her pain, felt her confusion as she came to terms with her new life. Still, she was not just a victim of his desires. He had never meant to trap her. He had wanted her to understand slowly, surely, that this realm, while full of shadows, was not devoid of life. Death, after all, was but one part of the cycle. Rebirth, rest, peace, these were all concepts that could exist within his kingdom too. But Persephone had resisted, as he had known she would. She had fought the darkness with everything she had, desperate to return to her mother, to the world of light. It had torn him apart to watch her struggle, to see the grief in her eyes when she called out for Demeter. And yet, he had remained firm. He could not let her go, not yet. She needed to understand that the balance between the living and the dead was delicate. She had to learn that her destiny was not one of singularity, that she was destined to rule both worlds. What had truly hurt him, though, was the day she had changed. When Persephone, the goddess of life and spring, had finally stopped fighting the shadows, he saw it in her eyes. The surrender, not to him, but to the truth of the underworld. She had become more than just the spring. She had become the queen of death, a goddess who ruled not only the living but also the dead. But that was not the reason Hades had taken her. In truth, he had never expected her to become his queen so willingly, or to find peace in the darkness. He had not been seeking a partner or a ruler. At first, he had simply wanted her to see him, really see him for who he was, the king of a realm that no one ever truly understood. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had wanted her to need him as much as he needed her, to fill the void that stretched endlessly before him. Now, as Persephone stood in the barren world between life and death, Hades felt the weight of his actions. The balance between their worlds had begun to crack, and it was his fault. He had made her a queen, had brought her into his world, but the consequences of his desires were heavier than he had anticipated. The earth above was suffering, and with it, his love. Hades had taken Persephone because, in that moment of selfishness, he believed that the only way to truly understand life was to understand death. But now, he realized that the cost of this understanding might be far greater than either of them could bear, and still, he could not undo it. His love for Persephone had always been a dangerous thing, and now, it threatened to destroy everything.